Hello class, Faisal here, coming at you with your class of the day for July 20th for summer school. We are on the home stretch here. There are only 19 days left, or no, not 19, 9 days left in the class, right? It ending on June 29th, so we're almost done here. So first of all, midterms are today. I will be giving those to you probably in the afternoon, right? Once I figure out the exact system that the admin wants me to give them to you. I'll probably make another video explaining the midterms there, right? But you will be able to see them hopefully on the website, right? Because I'm using the website to distribute them right through the gradebook system. So I'll give you more information about that this afternoon, right? Probably after the Q&A session, right? I'll get your midterms in your hands. But what I want to talk about right now, before we dive into Othello, is I want to talk about what's left in the course, right? Because we are in the last 9 days, and we still have a couple of things we want to accomplish. So first of all, in terms of smaller assignments, you've got two things that are coming at you, right? So first, you've got two reflections. One is going to be due tomorrow, and another one is going to be due Thursday, right? You'll find them right here on the website. You'll find the first one, at least. And I'll talk more about this when we get to the end of the video, but basically it's going to be a 1 to 2 paragraph reflection, probably just one, right, where you react to something from the play Othello, which we'll be talking about shortly, right? So one of those is due tomorrow and one of them is due on Thursday, right? They're roughly the same level of difficulty as the short story questions, or at least maybe a little harder because I am asking for a full paragraph, but you know, it's not that bad. And then we're also having two seminars, one on Wednesday and one on Monday, right? So you should have received your seminar grade through the website, by the way. This is going to be the same thing as the first half. Both of these seminars are going to be on Othello, right? So we're going to be really focusing on Othello, and that will be sort of the second half of your seminar grades here in this course. Then finally, you've got for the end due this June 29th, or July 29th, I should say, the Othello Essay, right, which is already posted right here for you to take a look at. So this essay is similar and different to the one I've just marked and hopefully given back, right? And I'll be talking about this throughout the week. But this essay is a little different because, in essence, you are going to be submitting the questions to me, right? So let me just go through this here. Your task in this assignment is to write an essay that answers a question related to Othello of your own choosing. So what this means is, as you read the play, whatever it is that interests you can be your essay topic, right? So you can, if you're really interested in the female characters, you can write about them. If you're really interested in Othello, you can write about him. If you're interested in the antagonist, Iago, you can write about him, right? So it's really in your hands what question you can choose. So that gives you a lot of freedom here. The reason I do it like this is that often you'll find you have to do this in university, right? Where you get to decide what you want to do in the university setting, right? It's not the professor won't say, okay. Sometimes the professor will give you questions, but sometimes the professor will be like, hey, what do you want to write an essay about? What do you want to do, right, in your essay, right? And you will be the one who decides which direction your essay is going to take, right? So that is one thing that makes this assignment sort of unique in this way. So you have to pick a question, but you can't just pick anything, right? So we'll be talking about this throughout the week, but the question can be anything related to the play. But the one thing I'd say is you're not supposed to try give me a question that's too simplistic. Like, To use a example from Gravel, let's say we were doing this with Gravel, right? I wouldn't let you do a question like, did the mother cheat on her husband, right? Because that, first of all, how are you going to write a whole essay about that? And second of all, it's too simple. It's too easy. It's just going to be retelling the story. So what I want is a nice, interesting question for you to answer. Now, before you start writing the essay, you've got to get that question approved. Don't start writing it before you get your question approved, right? The question's going to be due by July 24th, which is this Friday. But if you wish, you can submit your question earlier, right? So you can submit it, even today if you've already read the play, right? So that part is up to you. But I don't want to hear anyone saying, "Hey, teacher, I've already written half my essay," and then you show me the question and it's just a really dumb question, right? I don't want to be put in that situation. So do not write before you start to um, answer it. And what I will do, by the way, is I'll make a special assignment for you to submit questions so that I can, well, talk to you about that. So, that's step one. And then step two is the step you're going to be very familiar with, which is to write a 1,000-word essay that answers your question. So this is just like the essay you've already handed in to me, right? The Gravel essay. So hopefully you should have received the grade for this this afternoon, right? If not earlier. So that grade will hopefully have given you some feedback of what you shouldn't do again. So if I said in your first essay, hey, make sure your thesis is clear, or watch the way you do this, or watch out for commas or something like that, right? You're gonna not make that mistake twice. Now, I'll talk more about quoting in a later video, right? But quoting is done a little differently in Shakespeare, right? It's done by act, scene, and line. I'll talk more about that another day. But this is your final assignment, right? And it is due July 29th, next Wednesday, by midnight, and not one moment later, right? I will underline this, I will emphasize this. No extensions on this one, guys, right? I know for this essay I just did, right? It was due on Friday, and a couple of people gave it to me on Saturday, a couple of people gave it to me on Sunday, right? And I'm pretty easygoing about this. But for this case, guys, the course is over on July 29th, right? So you can't get an extension if you even a day extension. You'll need to get a doctor's note and give it to the vice principal. So I will emphasize July 29th by midnight and not a moment later. Okay? So that is your final Othello assignment, and we'll be talking about it throughout the rest of this week. I should mention it's worth 30%, 30, of your final grade, right? So for those of you who are concerned about your grade after your midterm, right, this assignment is your chance to get it up, right? It's really an assignment that's very important, right? If you're at 78% at your midterm, then this assignment can easily get you to 80 or even 85, right? But if you're at 85 now and you blow it, right, and you get a bad mark on this essay, you're going down to a B, right? So it's a very important assignment. You want to make sure you do well on it, right? And I'll be answering your questions in the Q&A session throughout the week. So, to summarize, the small things, 2 reflections, 2 seminars, right? And the big thing is the major essay. That's what we're doing for the next 9 days. So let's get down to business here, right? We're going to be turning towards Othello, right? Which you can find, of course, on the content tab of the website. You click on Othello here. There's a copy of Othello. You click on that, and that'll open up a PDF. As I've said in a previous video, I can't give you guys a copy of Othello the play to watch, right? Because, I don't want, as a teacher, I'm not supposed to tell you, hey, go watch this video from an illegal streaming site. I'm not supposed to do that. But I think the best thing you could do for yourself throughout this week is find a way to watch a version of Othello. You can find online copies of it on YouTube if you just type Othello into YouTube, right? There's this performance by the Rainham channel, right? So you can just type Othello into YouTube and you'll get a couple of performances. The best one, in my opinion, is the Lawrence Fishburne and Kenneth Branagh version, right? But honestly, even watching a kind of mediocre version of it on YouTube is better than not watching it at all, right? Because Othello is meant to be seen, not just watched. But let's start by talking about Shakespeare. So I think the video I made in just last month in June, right, really does capture what we're going to be talking about for Shakespeare. So I'm going to switch it over to the long haired version of me who's going to tell you all about Shakespeare. Shakespeare! Let's talk about him. So, who's Shakespeare? So, he wrote during the late 16th and early 17th century. The majority of you have read Macbeth, and so I hope you guys still remember and know a thing or two about him. So, the 16th and 17th century, this was a time when kings and nobles still ruled the land and the country, and when I say country, I mean England or the United Kingdom, was in the process of starting its colonization of the world, right? North America was starting to be colonized, and other places around the world were being colonized, but colonization had not reached its height yet, right? Which it would in the 19th century. So Shakespeare's a playwright in this society, and his society is a lot different from ours in terms of technology, but has some similar characteristics as well, right? And I'm not going to go through all of the details of what his society was like, right? I mean, if you would like to know, I can answer that maybe another day. But in terms of what his society wanted, well, the key thing for understanding Shakespeare is to know that, Shakespeare, first of all, the reason he's writing is one reason primarily, and that's for money, right? So Shakespeare doesn't write his plays for his passion or because he likes writing so much or for art or any of those kind of things that he wants to make something beautiful or anything like that. Shakespeare's objective when he's writing is to make money, but not in a bad way. He wants to sell out his plays and get people talking about him so that they bring all their friends to see it, right? So his objective when he's writing his plays is to, well, run a business, right? And to get people coming to see his plays, right? And that's very similar to what they do in Hollywood nowadays. Shakespeare's theater looks like this, right? It's got all these seats, right? And you charge more for the people up here in these boxes, right? Because that was considered elite, right? You could sit down there. There would be cushions in the seats, whereas the common folk would be sitting down here, up at the front. Personally, I would prefer to be, in the standing area. But, that's what the theater looks like, right? And Shakespeare's objective when he writes the plays is very simple, which is to sell a ticket for every single one of the seats, right? Both the rich seats and the poor seats, right? Everyone he wants to sell to in order to, well, make a bunch of money, right? So that is his objective there when he is making his plays. So how do you do that? How are you going to make sure that people come to see the play? Well, same thing you do in order to make a successful movie nowadays. You're going to need some action, you're going to need some comedy, you're going to need romance, you're going to need drama, you're going to need some political intrigue, right? All of the stuff that sells out today is what would sell out in Shakespeare's time. And that's really what gets to the heart of why Shakespeare still gets studied today and why, people still like these plays. It's because, you've got these this audience that even though the technology is very different, they're using swords, they're using, very primitive medical technology, everything like that. Even though there's all that, the way the audience acts and the ways they behave is very much similar to how we, as a society, act and behave today. We still like action, we still like comedy, we still like romance, and everything like that. So that's part of what makes Shakespeare so interesting, is that even though these plays are about 500 years old, uh, the messages inside of them and the attitudes and the drama itself are still very much well liked. But there's one major difference between our society and Shakespeare's society, which is the treatment of women. So in Shakespeare's time, there were no actresses allowed, right? If a woman stood on that stage that I have a picture of here and spoke and was seen, she would be considered to be like a prostitute, right? It was very much forbidden in Shakespeare's time for women to be on the stage, right? So that was considered to be sinful, right? If a woman did something like that. To the point where the Catholic Church, at least in France, would not give you a proper burial if you were a woman who is an actress in France, right? So it was considered sinful, it was considered awful, right? So a woman could not get on the stage in Shakespeare's time. And for those of you who have not studied Shakespeare before, you might be thinking, well, okay, what about all these female characters in the plays, right? How did he have female characters if, there's no women to play them? So the answer to that is, well, what he did is he used 11-year-old boys, right? Or 11 and under, right? Boys who had not had their voices crack yet, right? And still talk like this in a high voice. I can't really do it. But, those boys who have very high voices, right, would be trained from basically the time they could walk, right, up until their voices crack, right? They would be trained up on how to play women, right? So every single female character that you've encountered in Shakespeare, right? And I know many of you studied Macbeth, right? And you know Lady Macbeth, right? Lady Macbeth would have been played by a boy, right? And what that means for Shakespeare, incidentally, right, is that any female character he wrote had to be something a boy could do, right? So, this limits Shakespeare's abilities when it comes to writing women, right? So a legitimate criticism of Shakespeare is that his female characters tend to be a little two-dimensional. And, well, you have to remember that he was writing at a time when he can't actually use women. He has to use boys, right? So any part that would be played by Shakespeare would have to be played by a boy. Anyhow, let's talk about Othello. So, Othello is a unique play, right, even among Shakespeare's plays, because it's the only play Shakespeare has with an African protagonist, right? So, there are other plays that have African characters in them, right? In one play, Titus Andronicus, there is an African character, and he's the bad guy, right? But this play is unique because the protagonist is himself African. And, that is an interesting thing, personally, for me to be teaching, especially in the current climate with the Black Lives Matter protests and everything like that. I mean, this is a play that opens with a black man being arrested for no reason, but nevertheless, that is one of the defining characteristics of this particular play, is that it's Shakespeare's only black protagonist. Now, let me give you guys some background about that. So, Othello, that's the name of the protagonist, is a Moor, right? Which is a term, I think slightly offensive term, that references Morocco, right? So if you look at this old map uh, of Europe, right, you'll see that England is here. And if you go over to England, or go over to Africa, the first place you reach is Morocco, right? So that's why the English typically would call anyone from Africa a Moor, right? So, Morocco was the closest place to England from, uh, or the closest place from Africa to England, right? So they called everyone from Africa Moor. So Othello, the character, there's been a lot of debate over the years about his skin color, right? And it could be that Morocco is, light black. Where are they? There they are. Like a Tunisian, right? You see Tunisian people, they're sort of very light brown. Or he could be darker like a Somali, right? We don't know exactly what Shakespeare meant when he wrote this character. But the thing to know is that whether he's light black like a Tunisian or dark black like a Somali, right? He's supposed to be a black man living in a white society, right? And let me tell you, Shakespeare's society was anything other than multicultural, right? This is not a society that's diverse, right? Uh, this is a time when you could go through most of your life, right, and probably never see someone of a different skin color, right? There was colonization going on, right? It was certainly, English people were going to settle North America, for instance. Oh, and before anyone asks, yes, the slave trade was happening during this time. But for a person in England, especially someone like Shakespeare, they would not be meeting African people so frequently, right? And if they did, it would be something sort of unusual. Oh, I should also mention, because I know this stuff is going to come up given what kind of play this is, uh, the African slave trade is happening right now in the Atlantic, or rather during Shakespeare's time in the Atlantic, right? That is happening. Shakespeare is a playwright in London, and I don't want to get into the weeds here, but the rule of England was that slavery was forbidden in the English islands, right? So it was against the law to have a slave in England, but you could have a slave in their colonies over in America. So slavery was illegal for Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare did not own a slave or anything like that. He was not involved in the slave trade, right? But his country, right, the country he was part of, was engaging in the slave trade at that very moment, right? So, yeah, take that as you will. But Othello is no slave, right? What Othello is he's a mercenary, right? So going back to the map here, a mercenary is someone who works for money, a soldier that works for money. And what would happen during the 16th century, right, is you see here the southern states here, the so-called Barbary states, right, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, right, they were Muslim states, right, as was the Turkish Empire, or the Ottoman Empire, I should say, in the east, right? These are the Muslim states, right? And you had, of course, the rest of Europe as the Christian states. And the mercenaries, well, they want to make money, right? They want to get as much cash as they can, right? Because being a mercenary is being a business. So if you're a mercenary group, right, and you hear, hey, there's a very rich city in Europe called Venice, and they're looking for some mercenaries to help defend their city, right? And it's a good deal. It's a good, pay, right? And you're down in Tunisia, right? What you might do is you'll get your mercenaries on a boat, you'll sail all the way to Venice, and you'll get there and say, hey, we're mercenaries. And what the employers will ask you is, well, hang on, this is a kind of important question. Are you Christian or are you Muslim? Right? And if you're a mercenary and the guy you want to work for is Christian, then of course you're going to say Christian. And then if you go back to work in Africa, right, and you're working for a Muslim now, right, then of course you're going to say, oh, I'm Muslim, of course, right, because, well, what you want to do is make money, right? So mercenaries would go back and forth, right, and they would convert to whoever is going to be in their financial interest to convert to, right? So if you're an African mercenary working in uh, Europe, right, then you might have to convert to Christianity in order to work, right? And if you're a Christian mercenary working in Africa, you might have to convert to Islam to do the same thing. So that's typical of the time, right? They called this being renegades at the time. So that is how we meet Othello, right? Othello is a mercenary from Africa, right, who's working in Venice, right? And he's the best mercenary there is. He's a great military leader. So he goes up to Venice to work there, right? And in the process converts to Christianity. Now, let's get to the actual play. This is a good version of the play because it has annotations, but guys, I would vastly prefer for you guys to be looking at, the actual text, like a book like the Macbeth one, but, we work with what we can online. So, it's a big PDF, right? And you're going to have to scroll down a bit in order to get to the actual play, right? The actual play begins on page 28 of the play, right? And uh, the way you read this is, it is a play, right? And you guys have read plays before, so I hope you know what you're doing, right? You have at the beginning Rodrigo and Iago coming in, right? And they're talking about something that's happening in the city, Othello. So there are 2 pages for each scene, right? There's the actual text, right, which is going through, that play. But you'll notice there are footnotes throughout the entire text, right? And then on the other pages, right, there's the explanation of what those footnotes mean, right? So it's a little weird to read in a PDF format, right? But the thing to know is when you've come across a word that you don't know, right? So, for instance, Iago says here at the beginning of Act 1, splud, right? And then there's a footnote here, 2, right? What you do is you find footnote number 2, and you'll see splud, an oath or curse meaning by God's blood, right? So, this is much easier when you have the book, right? And it's just, over here's the notes, over here's the text, right? That's a lot easier. But, we got to work with what we've got. If you open the text with a PDF reader like Foxit Reader, right, which is what I use, and you go into View and you put it into, what did I do? Continuous facing mode, right? So it's like this. That makes it a lot easier to read, right? Because then you have it so that the footnotes are on the right side of the screen and the actual text is on the left side, right? So that makes it a lot easier to read, right? So I highly recommend doing it like that if you can, right? Because then you can just have, be reading here and see the footnotes on the right side of your screen as you're going along. So I'll post a link to Foxit Reader. It's for PC and it's free on the website, right? So you get Foxit Reader, which is way better than Adobe Reader, by the way. Adobe sucks. So Foxit Reader, get that. You go to View, just like I am here, and you press this button, and it'll set it up just like I've got on the screen here, and that'll be a lot easier for you to read. Now, let's get to the play then. Act 1. So, our play here begins with two men, Rodrigo and Iago, right? And this is just on the first page, or Act 1, Scene 1, right? We have these two men coming in and talking to one another. So, hold on a second. Okay, so, you play Iago, or you play Rodrigo, I'll play Iago. Yeah, okay. So, the scene that begins with Rodrigo and Iago entering. So let's see. Tush, never tell me. I take it much unkindly that thou, Iago, who hast had my purse as if the strings were thine, shouldst know of this. Sblood, but you will not hear me. If ever I did dream of such a matter, abhor me. Thou toldst me thou didst hold him in thy hate. Despise me if I do not. 3 great ones of the city, in personal suit to make me his lieutenant, off-capped to him. And by the faith of man, I know my price. I am worth no worse a place, but he, as loving his own pride and purposes, invades them with a bombast circumstance, horribly stuffed with epithets of war, and in conclusion, non-suits my mediators. For, certes, says he, I have already chose my officer. And what was he? Forsooth, a great arithmetician, one Michael Cassio, a Florentine, a fellow almost damned and a fair wife, that never set a squadron in the field, nor the division of a battle knows, more than a spinster, unless the bookish lyric, wherein the togged castle can propose as masterly as he, mere prattle without practice is all his soldiership. But he, sir, had the election, and I, whom his eyes had seen the proof, at Rhodes, at Cyprus, and on other grounds, Christian and heathen, must be belied and calmed by debtor and creditor, this countercaster. He in good time must his lieutenant be, and I, God bless his mark, his moorship's ancient. So, Shakespearean speeches. I know a lot of you have experience with Macbeth, and it comes in handy here, because in order to successfully read a Shakespearean speech, you need to sort of train yourself how. It's not that hard once you get used to it, right? You just sort of have to look for 3 key things. The first thing is the reason I'm giving you this PDF version, which is the glossary, right? So the glossary is very handy because it'll tell you the meaning of words that you might not know right away. So, for instance, in this speech, 3 great ones of the city in personal suit to make me his lieutenant, off-capped to him. And you might be thinking, off-capped? What does that mean, off-capped? Well, it says the number 3 there, footnote. So what you do is you go to the right side, and you find number 3, off-capped. Took off their caps in a gesture of pleading, right? So the glossary is your first friend when it comes to understanding a Shakespearean speech. Use it, right? It is, again, there to help you, right? So please don't give up so quick. The second thing you need to do is sort of look for the main idea of a speech, right? So that usually comes at the beginning and the end of a Shakespearean speech, right? So Iago here says that 3 great ones of the city in personal suit to make me his lieutenant, off-capped to him. And we know off-capped means took off their caps in a gesture of pleading, right? So we know that 3 people went to Othello and asked them to make Iago the lieutenant, right? A lieutenant, by the way, in this context, is sort of a second in command, right? It's someone who's, sort of vice general or something like that, right? Sort of is, second in command. So he wanted to be the lieutenant, and 3 people went and pleaded for him, but, well, But he, as loving his own pride and purposes, evades them with a bombast circumstance, horribly stuffed with epithets of war and inclusion, non-suits my mediators, right? So again, use the glossary, right? This word non-suits, we look up there. 6, refuses. That is, turn down their suit. So in other words, he wanted the job as lieutenant, and Othello said no, right? And in his place, he gave it to this guy called Michael Cassio. So, that's the main thing, is to find the main idea of a speech. And he has the main idea of the speech is that he has not gotten his job. So, Iago is upset about this, and that brings us to number 3 for understanding Shakespearean speeches. You want to make sure you don't get lost in the similes and in the references that that are always placed in these longer speeches, right? So the person who got the job was a guy called Michael Cassio, who we'll meet later, right? So he's a Florentine, a fellow almost damned in a fair wife, that never set a squadron in the field, nor the vision of a battle, no, more than a spinster, unless the bookish lyric when the togged counsels can propose as masterly as he, mere prattle without practice, right? So again, use the glossary if you don't follow the words, right? A spinster is a woman who's not been married yet, right? Basically, what he's saying about Cassio there is that this guy doesn't know anything about fighting. He's just like, a bookkeeper or that sort of thing. So that is what Iago is upset about. So that's the essence of looking at these Shakespearean speeches. Use the glossary, look at the beginning and end of a speech for the main points, and focus on things that are being talked about already, right? So there are always comparison and similes in longer Shakespearean speeches. Don't get lost in them. Now then, Iago here hates Othello because he did not get a job from him. More on that later. But Rodrigo, meanwhile, hates Othello because he is marrying Desdemona, and Rodrigo would much rather Desdemona married him instead of Othello, right? So Othello is marrying Desdemona, and Rodrigo does not like that. Now, here's where we get to the heart of the matter. So what's happened is Othello and Desdemona have what's called eloped. Let me put that in here. So they've eloped. What that means, what that word means is eloping is when you get married in a church without the parents' permission, right? So it's a legal marriage, right? And once a priest marries you, you're married. But eloping is done against the will of the parents, right? It's sort of when you run off and get married without the consent of anyone. So, this is where things get interesting. So Othello is a black soldier, right? As we've been talking about from last time, right? Othello is black, and he's there working as a mercenary, whereas Desdemona is a white noblewoman, I should say. So this is an interracial marriage. So this play is set in Venice, which is a white city, and it's being written by Shakespeare, who is living in London, which at the time was also a white city. There's no such thing as multiculturalism in the 16th century London, right? That's unheard of. And so interracial marriage is something extremely rare in Shakespeare's time, right? There are Africans in London, of course, but they're mostly travelers and sailors. There are, some mixed couples, especially along the southern part of Europe, right, which is closest to Africa, and the northern part of Africa for that matter, right? So it's not like it doesn't happen ever, right? But it's not a multicultural subtext, right? This is not Toronto that we're talking about here. Even Toronto, by the way, you might be surprised. In 2011, in Canada, 4.6% of marriages in Canada are interracial, right? Most people think it's a lot higher than that. But even in Canada, which does pride itself in multiculturalism, it's only 4.6%. So it's not relatively common. Nevertheless, right, this is very controversial, right? And Rodrigo, who was in love with Desdemona, is especially upset about it. Now, the interesting thing about Othello is that he's living in Venice, and as we're going to discover, he's there to help defend the city. He's good at doing that, and they absolutely love him for that, right? So when he is defending the city and when he is, working as a mercenary professionally, right? They absolutely love this guy, right? You're going to see that in scene 2, and you're going to see that throughout the entire play, that everyone respects and loves this guy as a general. But when it comes to other things, particularly marriage, right, and marrying a nobleman's daughter, that's something different. That is putting down roots, and we'll see that causes Rodrigo and Iago to have, their grievances. So, their first move, right, or Iago's first move, is to tell Desdemona's father that his daughter has now gotten married without his permission, eloped, right? So, this is on page 9 of the PDF, right? Act 1, Scene 1, line 108, right? So, they're talking to Brabantio, right, who's the name of Desdemona's father, right, and they're telling him, hey, your daughter eloped, right, and Iago says, zounds, sir, you are one of those that will not serve God if the devil bid you, because we are come to do you service, and you think we are ruffians. You'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse, you'll have your nephews neigh to you, you'll have coursers for cousins and genets for Germans, right? So what he is doing there is he's talking about Othello, right? Who, again, we haven't met Othello yet, but Iago is talking about Othello and this whole thing of calling him a horse, right? You'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse, right? That is racial language, right? And it is there quite deliberately, right? He is referring to Othello as a horse, right? And, a stud horse particularly. And, he's dehumanizing him already. So what I'm saying here is that Iago is essentially saying, hey, your daughter's getting married to a black man, and you should be mad about that. And Rodrigo, Brabantio, is instantly angry because of that, right? Even though Othello is very loved in the city and everything like that, right? He is still quite, outraged that his daughter would marry, not just without his permission, but specifically marry a black man, right? So we can see that racism is definitely going to be one of the main themes of this play, right? We can see that right away. Now, I will emphasize one thing before you jump to a conclusion about Shakespeare. Iago is the bad guy, right? You should know that. Iago is very much the antagonist of the story. So his being racist is maybe, don't think, oh, Iago's racist, therefore Shakespeare's racist, right? You can, by the way, argue later on that Shakespeare is racist if you so desire, right? Certainly you would not be the first people to do that. But it is nevertheless something to take into consideration when you see what Iago is doing, right? Iago's the bad guy, as we'll talk about in a moment. But nevertheless, we see that those kinds of slurs are sort of peppered into Iago's speeches, right? Oh, here it is. On line 88, right, on page 9, Iago says, your heart is burst, you have lost half your soul. Even now, very now, an old black ram is topping your white ewe, right? An ewe being a kind of horse, right? So I don't know about horses, but nevertheless, the keywords there are black and white, right? So for the beginning of the play, we very much see, it's a racial thing, right? It's not just, hey, your daughter got married without your permission. It's your daughter married a black guy, right? And that's what is the big problem here. So, before we go on, quick point about Iago here. This line on page 5, or page 7, sorry, line 42, is sort of the key to Iago in the entire play. So Iago, as we said, is mad about not getting the job. There's also other things he's mad about Othello for, right? But this is the key to Iago right here, where he says to Rodrigo, "O sir, content you, I follow him to serve my turn upon him." So, what that means is that he is working for Othello in order to get his revenge for not getting the job. And again, other things that we'll talk about later, right? It's not just not having a job that makes Iago so angry, right? It's other things as well. But nevertheless, he's working for Othello in order to get his revenge for not getting the job, right? So what that means is that Iago is pretending to be Othello's friend, right? While at the same time looking for his revenge, right? So he is, going to sort of pretend to be Othello's friend and at the same time, look for revenge, right? So, should I talk about devils now? No, I'll talk about devils later. So, nevertheless, that's the kind of person he is, right? And we see that start to take place in the scene immediately after, right? Because, he's the one who calls Desdemona's father, right? And gets Othello in trouble, right? So he's the one who does all that. But then we'll see in Act 1, Scene 2. So, Iago in Act 1, Scene 2, right at the beginning, right after he's gotten Brabantio all mad, and Brabantio is going to try to arrest Othello, Iago shows up with Othello, and by the way, here we finally meet Othello, and we see he says, "Though in the trade of war I have slain men, yet do I hold it very stiff of the conscience to do no contrived murder. I lack iniquity. Sometimes to do me service 9 or 10 times I had thought to have yerked him here under the ribs. 'Tis better as is. Nay, but he prated and spoke such scurvy and provoking terms against your honour, that with the little godliness I have, I did full hard forbear him. But I pray you, sir, are you fast married? Be assured of this, that the Magnifico is much beloved, and hath in effect a potential as double the Duke's. He will divorce you, or put you what restraint and grievance the law, with all his might to enforce it on, will give him cable." So, remember, Iago caused the problem, right? He's the one who got Brabantio angry about this marriage, right? He's the one who's reported it. But now he's going to Othello and he's warning him, right? So he's caused a problem for Othello by, informing his wife's father that they've eloped and everything like that. So he caused the problem, and now he's going to Othello and warning him that, hey, that guy, the father of your wife is coming, your father-in-law is coming to arrest you, right? So he is, pretending to be Othello's friend, even as he's working behind the scenes to sabotage him. So that brings us to one of our key concepts in this play, right? That I'm going to be mentioning again and again, and that you have to take into consideration when you're studying Othello, and that is the idea of dramatic irony. So, dramatic irony is very simple. It's when we, and when I say we, I mean the audience, know something that the characters on stage do not know. So, what that means is we saw Iago with Rodrigo cause trouble and get Othello, or cause trouble and report Othello's marriage to Desdemona to Rodrigo, right? So we saw that, right? We saw that with our very eyes, we heard it with our ears, everything like that. Othello did not see it, right? So Othello has no idea that Iago was doing that. In fact, how could he have an idea? He was not there, right? It was just Iago, Rodrigo, and Brabantio. So Othello has no idea of what's happened. And here's the key thing. We have to take that into consideration for this entire play, because this play is all about dramatic irony. We will always know what Iago is doing, but Othello will, well, he has to figure it out. So, from Othello's perspective, and this is something that's very important, from Othello's perspective, Iago has come to warn him about a big problem, right? So he's gotten a nice warning from Iago here. So therefore, Iago is his friend, right? So, if someone warns you that something bad is going to happen, of course you're going to think, oh yeah, that guy, is a good guy. He's my friend. So that is the issue here, right? Is that from Othello's perspective, Iago has come to warn him. So let me give a big warning right now for the purposes of questions and for the purposes of everything we're going to do in the course. When it comes to Othello, right? I'm talking about Othello the character, not Othello the play, right? If you're ever going to say Othello is stupid, right, you always have to take into consideration dramatic irony, right? So if you ever say, for instance, oh, look, Othello, he's trusting Iago here, right? He thinks Iago's a good guy, even though Iago caused the problem. You have to think, dramatic irony. Okay, okay. So this has been a nice long video, has it not? So, to wrap things up, right? For tomorrow, what I want you guys to do is read the rest of Act 1, right, which I've already been talking about in the video here, right? So read up to page 43 of the text. It's, page 43 of the text here, right? So the end of Act 1, Scene 3 is what we're aiming for, right? And remember what I said about reading Othello. Number 1, use the glossary, right? Use the glossary in order to figure out any words that you have trouble with. Number 2, pay attention to main ideas of speeches. Don't get lost in similes and metaphors, right? And number 3, probably the most important of all, watch the play, right? So that's very important. So remember those three things, and read to the end of Act 1, right? And remember, I am always available every day for questions and answers in the virtual classroom, right, at 2 o'clock. So if there's anything you don't understand in the play, you just come and you ask me. Now, I'm going to go ahead and post the reflection that's due Tuesday night on the website, right? So you'll be able to see it now. It's about what happens at the end of Act 1, right? So you won't understand it until we get there, right? That's going to be what tomorrow's video is all about. So what it is Othello's first act ends with the Duke saying, "If virtue no delighted, beauty lack, your son-in-law is far more fair than black," right? Analyze this statement and explain what it tells us about the world Othello is living in, right? So this is all about the racial aspects of the play, and we'll go into more details about this in tomorrow's video. For now, though, you guys need to read this play, right? And I hope you enjoy this play. We're going to be sort of zooming this week. Expect some longer videos like this one, right? Because this play is fairly complicated, right? And I do want to teach it properly, right? So expect the length of the videos to sort of go up a little bit over the next week, but we will get this done. So until then, I will be available in the virtual classroom at 2 o'clock, and I hope you're all doing well, and I will see you next time.